where she went tonight. Since she been back, she ain't been right. Her lips look good and her hair looks fine, but look a little deeper in her eyes. She never weeps and she never shakes, but deep in the night she lies awake, thinking about the days when the sun did shine, thinking about the faces she left behind. Can't you feel it? Can't you feel it? Can't you feel it? Can't you feel it? Oh, oh, oh. Can't you feel it?
Yo, what's going on, everybody? This is Louis Beck, and welcome back to Electronic Music Essentials. Already see a lot of you guys in there on the chat who I have seen the past few weeks. So what's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Shout out Enigmatic Onion, William Mindreaders, John Kingston III, Andrew Duke. What up, Kai Strukel? I hope I pronounced your name right. And yeah, welcome back. By the way, I did listen to the new King Gizzard. It is fucking dope. I love that band. They're so cool. So, welcome. As always, for those of you that are new, welcome for the first time. And of course, as I just mentioned, for those of you that are, returning customers, welcome back. This is 343 TV. It is the online educational demonstrational branch of 343 Labs, which is a music school based in New York City and Berlin. We offer classes in Logic, Ableton, mixing, mastering, synthesis, arrangement, composition, theory, vocal production, anything you want to learn, we pretty much can teach you. So, if you dig the content after today, please hit the subscribe button. If you've been, tuning in and already, digging stuff, but you haven't yet hit the subscribe button, go ahead and hit it right now. All right. So what we're going to be doing today is a little bit different than what I normally do. Usually we're doing specific topics, right? I've covered compression, I've covered audio effects, I've covered kick and bass, arrangement, all sorts of different things. The whole idea is that each week I'm going to give you guys information that's going to allow you to become better producers, make your music better, literally just immediately after finishing this video, right, and this stream. And so today what I am doing is I am going to be doing something called myth busting, which you obviously have seen in the title. So what exactly is that going to entail? Well, essentially, I am going to very simply just go through what I have kind of over the years seen on the internet and on YouTube and on, forums and stuff like this that are just pieces of bad information. So I'm just going to go through all of the bad information that I have seen on the internet, right, about music production. I'm going to go through really just kind of try to say, don't do this or do this, right? And this is stuff that is really, really common. These are things that almost every student that I've ever had, that most producers I've ever come across, including myself, at certain points in time, have thought were the right way to do things. And so, hopefully what today will do is it'll alleviate you of some bad habits that you may have and also prevent you from falling into some bad habits that you may yet develop. Now, also, what I've done is I basically compiled a list that I'm going to go through. I feel like there's a lot more, so as we're talking, I'm sure that I'll come up with other stuff. But one thing that I would love from you guys in the chat and people, who are tuning in is I would love for you guys to lob in questions, and ask about, common maybe production tips that you've heard that you want to know are they good tips or are they maybe not the greatest pieces of advice to follow. So that's what today's going to be structured around. It's not going to be so much really production. I mean, I'm obviously going to demonstrate the things that I'm talking about, but it is more just going to be a little bit talking about concepts. So I do have to apologize ahead of time for anyone that was tuning in hoping to hear me make some dope beats. It might happen at some point. Anyway, so let's just go ahead. Yes, this is going to be about OTT on everything. That's the only thing we're talking about today because OTT on everything is the only way to go. Everyone knows that the Beatles put OTT on everything. Right? Yeah, so we'll talk about that later. All right, let's just go ahead and get started. I will open up my Ableton just so we can, still feel like we're moments away from making dope shit. And also so I can just demonstrate, exactly what I am talking about. So let me see if I can go ahead and pull up these little notes that I have. I'm trying to think what's the best way for me to do this. So you guys tell me if you can see these little notes here on the side. This is kind of my lesson plan for today, so to speak. But if not, that's good because then it'll be a surprise. But if you can, oh yeah, okay, I can see it on the stream right there. Yeah. All right, that's perfect, but my face is blocking it, so I'll make it so you can't read it, so it'll be a sneaky surprise. All right, cool. Anyway, so first things first is this idea that you see a lot that says put a high-pass filter and low-pass filter on everything. So this is just utter fucking bullshit. There's no other way to put it. It's just kind of ridiculous. So let's go ahead and drag on a kick drum, first of all. Boom. That one's great. All right, so for those of you who have seen me produce before, you also probably know that I love arranging clips on the grid as opposed to using MIDI. Just kind of how I like to do it. There's no right or wrong way to do it. So that should actually also be another quick thing. There is no right or wrong way to make music. Period. End of story. Doesn't matter. If the finished product sounds dope, you made music correctly. Okay, cool. Let's take this one. I'm going to take a couple of different ones so we can talk about them, if they let me put it on the grid. Okay, cool. And then let's take a hi-hat. Great, that's a good one. All right, so like I was saying, first things first, right? You do not want to put a high-pass filter on everything, nor do you want to put a low-pass filter on everything. And so, yeah, Simple Sam, that's something that you see sometimes. People be like, oh, you should filter out everything below 60 hertz or 50 hertz, right? This is a terrible, terrible, terrible idea, right? A lot of really important information. In fact, the most important information in your kick drum, for instance, the stuff that's going to make the room shake, make the booties quake, that's the stuff that is happening below 60 hertz. So you definitely don't want to do that. So what I am going to quickly do is I'm just literally going to arrange the most simple, boring beat possible. And that's just so I can demonstrate to you what happens if you start doing high and low cuts on literally everything. One thing that's really common is I'll see students open up a track and literally, like, from some weird, template that they saw on a YouTube video, this will happen on every track that they open. And I'm just immediately like, face palm. This is not cool. You do not want to do this. So where did I put this? Right here. All right. So first of all, let's talk about like what high pass filtering, right, which is cutting the lows, even is and what it even does. Right? So the reason the high pass filter, it just very, very simply is to remove frequencies that make the overall performance, right, of that sound and your mix in general worse, right? So generally what we're talking about is subharmonic muddy frequencies. So what does subharmonic mean? Okay, so the human hearing range is from 30 hertz to 20,000 hertz, right? Now here's the thing. If you're over the age of 18, you probably can't hear above about 16,000. I know for me, I cannot hear above 16,000 hertz, I think. It's kind of depressing. If I set like a really tight Q and boost on a hi-hat, like I literally don't hear that. That I hear. That. Barely hear that. So I can't really hear above 15,000. So most people that you're going to be making music for are going to have the same inhibition. Why is this? We all love to listen to music really loud in our ears, in our headphones. We all like to go to loud concerts and not wear earplugs, right? So the funny thing is, you'll hear a lot of people talking about like, ooh, that boost at 20K sounds so nice. And like, yeah, it does. But what it's really doing is just drawing your attention to lower frequencies, right? That's all it is. Anyhow, that being said, just because you can't hear above 16 generally or 18, right, doesn't mean that there isn't really important information there that you need, because there is, right? So when it comes to mastering especially, right, a lot of the times you get a really dull mix. One of the things that helps brighten it up, helps bring it to life, is if you do a little bit of a shelf at like 16,000 or even 20,000. Sometimes there are EQs that have shelves at 40,000, which is well above anything anyone can hear, but sometimes it just sprinkles a little bit of fairy dust, right? Because it has these residual little bits of harmonics that it lifts up and little bits of phase that it introduces, which can sound pleasing at times. So like a huge mistake that people do on hi-hats, Jesus Christ, is going like really low, right? And worse yet, using the ×4. So this is the shit you want to avoid, okay? So what this ×4 is representing is essentially a 48 decibel per octave slope on a high pass, on a low pass or high pass filter. So the thing is that the way that a filter slope works, right, is that it essentially is just reducing the volume really drastically, right, by a certain literally amount of decibels per octave, usually measured, I believe it's measured attuned to A, right, from middle A. Anyway, point being is that you usually want to use a more gentle cut when you're cutting out lows or highs. The reason being is that when you use harsher cuts, you draw the attention more to this resonant point that is created when you actually make the cut. So you can hear, if we turn up the Q, this spot, right, is garbage. It's what I like to call butt sauce. It's just not nice at all, right? There's no circumstance where I really want that. So you might be thinking, oh yeah, well, I need to cut it out of the way of another sound or something, right? And so I need to really cut it out of there like really aggressively. Here's my first piece of advice, my first observation. If you need to use a 48 decibel per octave slope to cut something out of the way of something else, the odds are is that you have not chosen your sounds very thoughtfully, right? So the thing is with all this stuff, with music production, with EQing, with compression, right, is that the less of any of that crap you have to do, EQing, compressing, the less of that stuff you have to do, the better your music is going to sound. Period. End of story. Right? It's all about fidelity. And so what fidelity means is honesty, right? Truth. Trueness to a particular thing. So when we're talking about fidelity in music, we're talking about hi-fi, right? A hi-fi sound system. What that means is that the way that it was produced, the way that it was engineered, you're going to hear it exactly like that, right? So when we're talking about creating high-fidelity content, creating high-fidelity mixes, creating high-fidelity sounds, what we're really talking about is making sure that the original source is as good as possible so we don't have to touch it, right? If you get good enough at sound design, good enough at recording, good enough at performing, whatever it is, right, that all of your pieces fit together pretty much perfectly, and all you have to do is just a little teeny bit of EQ, a little cut here, a little reduction there, right? What you'll see is that the best sounding tracks that have the best sounding mixes usually have the best arrangements, the best instrumentation, right? The best combination of sounds. And if you looked into those mixes, you would be astonished and a little bit disappointed probably to see that there isn't that much going on. A really great mix usually doesn't have that much going on. right? It's usually just like a little bit of EQ here, a little bit of boost there. Nothing crazy though. We're talking about like a decibel and a half or two, maybe 3, 4 max, you know? A little bit of reverb here, some panning. It's kind of it, right? A little bit of parallel compression perhaps, but nothing like, okay, we're going to route this to there and put on 6 OTTs and now, you know, reinvent what reverb means and blah, 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 like all that shit. No, that's all bullshit, right? So coming back to the point is that if you need to use a cut this aggressive, I'm here to tell you that you probably did not choose your sound right, and you should try to adjust that sound a little bit. Because what you're going to do is introduce this unnatural resonance, right? And especially once you get below like 10,000. Yeah, I'd say really the spot would be like 11,000. You could kind of get away with doing this high. But what I would still do is I would still take a shelf and set it at the resonance point and turn it down a little bit so it sounds smooth. What ends up happening is, right, is you're creating an unnatural peak. You have to realize that every single sound in the universe, in one way or another, pretty much exists in every frequency, even if it's microscopically small. Infinitesimally small, right? Every frequency is required to make a sound feel alive, feel natural, sound real, right? So one of the reasons, quite frankly, a lot of people don't like electronic music. A lot of electronic music doesn't sound warm and clear and good, right? Is because there's a lot of this shit going on. People are making really, really intense cuts, and it's really not, it's not good. It's not good for the music. It makes things sound thinner. It makes things sound less defined. And then what ends up happening is in order to get back some of that definition, you have to boost more. And when you're boosting more, what you start doing is you start boosting all these little harsh resonant points. Doesn't sound good. So if you want to cut highs, which by the way, I cut highs all the time. But the way that I do it is I do it with a gentle slope. And I make sure that sometimes actually I'm not going to use the a low pass cut. In fact, a lot of the times it's a better idea to use a shelf. Use a gentle shelf. And just get rid of some of the harsh information. This way, it still sounds like a natural sound, right? You're still getting the full spectrum, right? Like I was saying, even though you can't hear this spot usually, it's so important to make it sound open and feel like it's breathing, right? You have to realize that when we're standing outside in open air, when we're standing in a room, the first parts of the environment that our ears are most attuned to is this top part of our ear, right? Which is where high frequencies are going to come in. The high frequencies of the sound, that little subtle bit of air and noise on top is what makes something sound natural. I'm really glad DJ Sweaty Sack, which is fucking the sickest name ever, by the way, from Twitch, that you're digging the detail. Love that. DJ Sweaty Sack. I really hope that's your real artist name, dude. I will support you immediately. Okay? Anything that you need, you let me know, including some talcum powder. So, now, similarly, right, you see a lot of this going on. And to be perfectly honest, this is just as bad, if not worse. This crap, right? Ugh. There's nothing that brings me more pain, right? So the exact same thing that we were talking about with the resonant little notches that occur, same thing's happening here. Best way to hear what you're creating when you do the ×4 cut is to just turn up the Q a lot. And you hear, oh. You're introducing that frequency into the sound. Watch. If I go to that same frequency, 441, okay, which is basically an A. And I boost. Even if I boost a shit ton, doesn't sound that bad. It's just the mids. It's just like mid stuff right there, right? Now, if I go like this, though, make the cut, and then boost, it's the same amount of decibels that we're boosting, and it sounds like garbage. That sounds really bad, right? You're literally introducing resonance where you don't want it, okay? So I can't caution you against this enough. Do not cut with this ×4 thing. There are certain circumstances where it's useful, okay? Cutting with ×4 is useful if you have a sub bass that's super powerful, okay? But it really, really is like a lot of garbage beneath 30 hertz, okay? That's where cutting at 30 with ×4 can be useful. Doing that on a master bus, though, is a terrible idea. You do not want to do this. Doing it on a kick drum that is sampled, especially if you take a sample-based kick drum, right? Where you got this shit off Splice, you're like, oh, I just got this sick new sample pack from fucking Cashmere or whoever, right? All right, gonna put it at 30. Now my kick is ready. No. This kick came pre-packaged, okay? Best way to know if the kick came pre-packaged, because look at that. There's literally no headroom. This shit is peaking at -1, basically, right? If we go over here, yeah, exactly. It's peaking at -1, right? So what that means is this has been limited. This has been compressed. You can be damn sure it's definitely been EQ'd, right? And so when you're looking at the file or the spectrum, you're like, oh no, but look, it's reduced. It's releasing information at like 20 hertz. Oh my God, everyone told me that you don't want information below 20 hertz. All right, well, that's just garbage. That's bad information, okay? Here's what the information that you should be looking at, okay? Here is the stuff that you need to think about if you want to cut at 20 hertz. If you want to cut at 30 hertz. Let's look at what's happening right here first, okay? In this area, which is at 35 hertz, okay? That's basically subharmonic. You can barely perceive the subharmonic, by the way, just means you can't hear the harmonics, right? So everything below 30 hertz, you can't hear the harmonics. You can only feel the vibrations. So that's why people used to cut them out so much. That's why this concept of cutting out the lows exists, because back in the day, before speakers even could produce below 50 hertz, they'd be like, yeah, cut out everything in a rock record below 50. Like, there's nothing there that you want or need, right? That wasn't like, you know, sound systems. People were listening to transistor radios in their cars and listening to like really bad over-the-ear headphones, right? And if they had hi-fi systems, they weren't going that low. They didn't prioritize those regions because there wasn't a function for those regions yet. It's only when club music started coming around, right, that 30 hertz, even 40 hertz, started coming into play as a cool thing, because then all of a sudden it changed the feeling of the sound, right? If you're just listening at home, you're not getting 30 hertz and below. You know, you can get, yeah, I guess it's your subwoofer, you know, and your neighbor's going to come and fucking stab you. But other than that, I mean, those frequencies are not contributing to the sound. They're contributing to the feeling. That being said, right, they do give a little bit of kind of like a pillow for the sound to exist on, right? An earthy bass. And by bass, I mean more like a structure, right? Not the sound of bass. All right. So what I'm saying is that when you're thinking about cutting out these frequencies, what you really need to be looking at is how loud they are proportionally to these. If these low frequencies, right, like 20 hertz we're talking here, if these are like really loud, right, like that, it's like an even curve, then this is a problem, okay? That means that this low stuff is just as loud as this stuff, right? Which means it's going to dominate the frequency spectrum. And that is bad, right? So if someone sends me a mix to master and I see that there is a significant amount of like low frequency buildup, subharmonic buildup, one thing I'm going to think about is, first of all, can I just shelve it off, right? So again, maybe all I need to do is go to 20 hertz or even 16 hertz and do a really gentle curve, and that'll solve it. Because again, right, I'm not going to actually introduce this notch, this resonant notch. Even cutting down there, you're still introducing this resonant notch, right? And so, yeah, I mean, really, really quickly to William's point, if you're mixing and mastering to be put to vinyl, there's so many different rules. First of all, you don't even use a limiter, right? Because there's less headroom on vinyl. The other thing, right, is that you do cut out frequencies below 30, 40 hertz, right? Sometimes even up to 50. The reason for that is because the actual way that vinyl works is it's picking up needle vibrations, right? The low, just by the disc turning, it's actually creating more low frequency vibrations. And so one of the reasons vinyl sounds warmer is because it actually is literally generating a greater proportion of low frequency vibrations, which is going to make it, warmer. All right. Anyway, you can hear how transparent that shelf is. And if you listen closely, you can also hear that we lose a little bit of knock from that kick, right? So I wouldn't necessarily reduce it that much. Maybe I go like that. Maybe even a little bit lower. So I'm still getting that punch at 30. Now, next thing, of course, is what if you're going to high pass your kick drum, right? Oh, because, and I don't want to give anyone a hard time, or I don't want to roast anyone, I don't want to make anyone feel bad, but this is something that someone pointed out to me the other day. Or not rather pointed out to me, this is something I saw in a student's project the other day. They went like this, because they're like, oh, I want more low frequencies. Okay, I want to focus on the low frequencies. I can see why when you're learning about EQ, this might make sense. But this is a really bad idea, because what happens is that you're taking away the transient definition of the kick, and you're actually making it less clear and less powerful. So I'm really glad that you're finding this so helpful, Korean Jesus. As you know, I love your name. Okay, so again, right? For my taste, this shit is too hot. I don't like that. For my taste. So, first of all, if you want to get rid of that, right? Your first instinct should not be to do a high cut, right? You shouldn't go, okay, let me cut right below there, right? Because again, that's what you're introducing. That is the sound that you're introducing into the song, right? That's going to build up the more that you do that. So don't do this. I can't stress this enough, right? So if you want to cut there, I always cut with a gentle cut. So it's more like a shelf, right? So a lower Q. What this basically allows to happen is that these high frequencies, which contribute to the transient definition, the snap of the kick, the definition of the moment that incurs the perception of rhythm. Really important, right? High frequencies are going to dictate the sense of rhythm more than any other frequencies because they're hitting our ears first. So, then I can get away with more reduction. Now it sounds more natural. I don't personally love that. But then what I would do is I can maybe go really high. Now I can go up to 22,000 where I can't hear and bring it back a little bit. Right? So now this sounds like a really, really, really clean edit of this kick. So yeah, anyway, I think you guys get the point. I think I've hammered this home enough. The last thing I'll say is just don't do this on your master, right? Don't do this. Don't put the ×4 at 30. That's really bad. Don't even put the ×4 at 20. Okay? Bottom line is, if you're mastering your own music, my recommendation is if you're going to cut out any lows, cut it out with the more gentle Q and do it at about 20, maybe even 16. Right? Bottom line, the other thing is that if you need to do this on your master, that means you fucked up your mix. Okay? You really should actually be fixing these problems in your mix. I just came from a mastering session on Monday with my favorite mastering engineer. His name is Kevin Blackler. He's amazing. I'm actually going to plug him super hard right now. I'm going to type his name into the chat. He's based in New York. He's expensive. Okay, I'm not going to lie, because he's very, very good. But he barely does anything to your tracks, and that's what makes him such a good engineer. He knows exactly what to do. So what goes on in mastering would blow your mind if you really saw what good mastering actually does. They're really making very subtle changes. A little bit of high boost, a little bit of low shelf, a little bit of mid cut, a little bit of high mid boost, things like that, right? Whatever it needs. Barely any compression, right? They're just shepherding it towards its final best quality. So the thing is a lot of people take a pretty good sounding mix and they completely fuck it up because of their master bus processing. So anyway, yeah, don't do that. Don't cut at 30 on your master bus, your mix bus. Don't cut at 30 on every sound. Don't cut out lows from every single sound. Only cut it out if you distinctly hear that it is making something else muddy, right? It's really, really nice and pleasant to have quieter harmonic elements, quieter tonal elements build up in certain areas. That's what makes music sound mystifying and beautiful. That's what makes it sound like a collage, the impressionistic quality, right? It's really nice to have sounds blend over into each other and cross over into each other's regions. You just want to make sure it's happening in a non-destructive way. All right, so thanks for giving me a really answer. Okay. I'm glad that this answer was helpful to you, Simple Sam. Yeah, so anyway, don't do that on the low end. Alrighty. Now, the only caveat to all that is if you're creating your own sounds from scratch, then you might want to consider doing low cuts, right? Because then, like, especially if you're designing a kick drum on an analog synthesizer, that stuff gets muddy below 30 hertz, and you do sometimes need to cut that, right? So if I generate a kick myself, if I create it from scratch, then I might honestly cut as high as 40 even sometimes. But if you're downloading a kick sample, best not touch the low end. Trust me, it's fine. All right, so let's see what the next little thing I cooked up is. All right, this is a great one. This is kind of a continuation of this, and this will take us into our next thing. So you should put an EQ on everything. This is totally incorrect, okay? The purpose of the EQ, right, and this is just now hammering home this point, right? The purpose of an EQ is to either rebalance a tonal problem of the sound itself, right, to make it tonally balanced and more clear, or to create room and space for another sound that needs to dominate that frequency, right? The best way to think about EQing is I want you to think about each frequency range like a stage, okay? You want to think about each frequency range as that it has a star. There's a star of the show at each frequency range, right? There can only be one star in each range, right? Each range, we could even, let's adjust this now. Let's say each range has a president, right? Of like what needs to be in charge in that area, okay? Basically, what your job as a mixer is, as a producer, is to figure out in which ranges what things should be the most important, should be the prioritized, right? So, should be the priority. So, in your low frequencies, right? Pretty obvious. It should be your kick drum and your bass, okay? Yeah, this is a great question from Twitch. I'll get to that in a second. I'll kind of segue what I'm saying right into that because it ties in. Yeah, so basically, right, if you're the sickest sound designer ever, right, the sickest producer, you don't need EQ. That's it, right? If everything that you make when you record it and design it on a synth is perfect, like truly perfect, and your production vision is exceptional, you literally won't need an EQ, right? Because everything is going to be perfectly fitting together. Now, that context, that circumstance rarely exists. And as we know, right, we like plugins from Universal Audio or Slate Digital or Acoustica or, Waves or whatever it is to add a little bit of grit and character sometimes, right? That stuff can be really nice. But the idea that you need an EQ on everything for it to sound good is wrong. Now, to get to this Twitch question, right? Another reason you do not want an EQ on everything is because every single time that you cut or EQ at all, you are ever so slightly inducing something called phase. Or really what's happening is you are altering the phase of the sound. So what is phase? So phase is this idea that comes from physics, right? And as you guys may or may not know and are probably discovering more and more, is that there's weirdly a solid amount of physics involved in sound, audio engineering and production. Okay, great. Yeah, I'll get to the parallel processing thing on the back of this. If I don't, just lob it in again, brand new talk, and remind me. So when we're talking about phase, what we're talking about literally is what point in time in the phase of this waveform, this continuous waveform, which constitutes the existence of this sound, right? At what point in time is it okay? Sorry, that was so stupid. Okay, at what part of the phase are you? What part of the phase are you at? Okay, that's what phase is referring to. So if we look really closely, we get really, really far in there. We can see the individual. Basically, these are sample points, right? Really, really cool. So this actually shows you from moment to moment, from sample to sample, what part of the wave is being represented and presented to you. Okay. Now, what phase is talking about? We're talking about phase, right? What we're really talking about is, have you changed the behavior of this waveform, right? So one thing that can happen when you like record with microphones, for instance, and what can happen is if you record a source with like 2 microphones, right? A lot of the times it happens with drums, especially. You'll get this really weird hollow sound, right? Where it sounds thin and you actually hear like a phaser sort of effect. What has happened is basically this sound wave has flipped upside down. Or alternatively, there is this sound wave is captured like this. And so it's out of phase, right? And so what's actually happening is the phase alignment between the sounds, which are identical, right? You're now hearing this weird smearing. So the transient is like not occurring naturally. And you're having moments in time where they're sort of canceling each other out. So that's a bad thing, right? Now, when it comes to linear phase EQing and stuff like that, when people learn, so linear phase is a digital EQ that doesn't induce phase. The way it doesn't induce phase is it introduces latency. So that's something really important to understand. When you're using a linear phase EQ, you are introducing latency, right? And so all that means, right, is that your computer is having to work harder and harder. It also means that your playback is delayed ever so slightly. Now, the thing with linear phase EQs is they theoretically sound good, but there's something about them that can be a little bit weird, right? And you have to be careful with using linear phase EQs in a project itself, right? Because you could be throwing off the rhythm ever so slightly. That's kind of like not really even worth thinking about. But I'm going to be perfectly honest, I just never use linear phase EQs. I never find that I get into a situation where I've introduced phase from EQing, right? In an awful way. The way that you introduce phase really with EQing is like if you're doing mid-side processing on a master or on any sound, and you're turning up a lot of frequencies out wide or turning down a lot of frequencies out wide and boosting things in the middle, right? That's going to fuck up the phase a lot. And that's when the sound gets a little bit thin and unnatural sounding and undefined. So a great way to tell if you're introducing phase is if all of a sudden the sound is hard to locate on the speaker, right? Stuff that's out of phase actually sounds like it's not sitting properly. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, you should not encounter phase problems when you're producing electronic music if you're only using samples and electronic stuff. That really only should be an issue that you're encountering if you are if you are recording things. At the end of the day, if you have phase problems in electronic music, what that really means is that you are stacking samples or stacking instruments in moments in time rhythmically that shouldn't be hitting at the same time. You need to either EQ them out, right? The other thing about phase is that phase also is referring to kind of how the speaker is breathing, right? Because the speaker goes out and then in and then out and then in really, really fast. So when something's out of phase, basically what ends up happening is it tells the speaker to push and to pull at the same time. And so that cancels it out and no sound emerges. Doesn't really happen with EQing. But the thing is that the more that you EQ, the more phase you introduce. What that means is the more you're throwing off the natural kind of occurrence of the sound. So if you EQ too much across a mix, what's going to end up happening is nothing is going to sound clear. Everything's going to sound a little bit murky and undefined. And you're going to end up with the classic, what I call the Ableton mix, which is where I could tell they went crazy on the EQ8. And it just sounds lumpy. So I would describe a phasey sound as a lumpy sound. Okay, now to come back to Brand New Talk's question about parallel processing. If you're doing parallel processing in the DAW, you shouldn't really be encountering phase issues because DAWs are doing latency compensation in real time, right? And phase compensation in real time. So I absolutely love parallel processing. Anyone who has ever watched if you've watched my streams, for a while, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of parallel processing. And yeah, so in terms of worrying about phase, the only time you need to start worrying about phase is if you're using a phaser or a flanger or some sort of modulation time-based effect on a return that is literally going to relocate the position of the transient, right, when you start mixing it in. Now, I will say real quick, I do also try to avoid using high pass and low pass cuts on parallel processing stuff. The reason for that being is because, which maybe is what you're really asking, Brand New Talk, is that it will in fact introduce a little bit of phase shift and may result in a phasey sound where the transients are no longer aligned and you lose the power and clarity, right? The best way to avoid that is kind of going back to my previous point, which is to use shelves. So I adore NYC compression. Parallel compression, I do it constantly. I love it. I do it with my analog compressors. It sounds fucking beautiful, right? Now, the thing is with parallel compression, right? One thing a lot of people don't do is EQ it. And actually, it's a great idea to EQ parallel compression. So you really can get exactly the tonal precision that you want to blend back in to cut through the mix, right? So if there's too much low end still somehow in the return, the parallel bus, right? Then I'll just take a shelf and really, really aggressively cut out lows. I'll shelve it out from, wherever it needs to be done. I'll shelf highs and stuff. I try not to do the cuts because then, again, right, you're introducing that resonant notch back into it, and things can get a little bit weird with that. You'll have to excuse me, guys, just for 1 second. I need to run to the restroom real quick, so I will be right back. Welcome back. Sorry about that. Okay, so continuing along. Let me know if that answered your guys' questions with parallel processing. I think that about did it, but let me know if you need more. Okay, so the next ones are kind of just like quick ones that I don't need to demonstrate. They're things we can just talk about that I just want to say to you all real quick. So first of all, okay, more expensive plugins does not equal better music. This is like, I just want to save you so much money right now, okay? There is no single plugin in the universe that if you get it, will make you successful, right? It just doesn't work like that. My recommendation when people start getting into music production even if they're just at a you know, intermediate level, and that's really the place where people start going crazy on plugins, right? Because they're like, oh, okay, I've learned about reverb, I learned about EQ, I think I get what they are, but well, everyone's, I see that Deadmau5 uses this reverb, or I see that, whoever it is uses this reverb or this EQ, and if they use that, well, I have to actually like be, if I want to be like them and successful, then I have to use those things. No, not at all. Okay, here's the bottom line. At the end of the day, if I really had to, I can make super sick sounding music only using all of the stock plugins in Ableton or all the stock plugins in Logic. It could be done. I wouldn't be happy about it, but it could be done. Okay? The reason to use more expensive things, advanced tools, right, is because you understand why you need them. So the example that I always use with students, okay, when I'm talking about buying plugins, buying synths, buying whatever it is, okay, is that a good producer, a good architect, whatever you want to call it, a good painter, right, understands when to use what tool and when. And that's really what this is about, okay? So, as a producer, you need to know the difference between a Toyota minivan and a Ferrari. I always use these examples, right? This is my favorite example, okay? If you need to transport a family of 4 on a road trip, you take the minivan. You don't take the Ferrari. That's like, why do you need a Ferrari to do that? It's literally impractical. Alternatively, if you need to get from A to B really quickly and it's just you and one other person, or it's just you, get in that Ferrari, right? The Ferrari is not only useful, it's a nice car, right? But sometimes it's actually going to be worse and give you more trouble than just using the really basic one, right? And so at the end of the day, what I mean by that is like, I used to be subject to this. When I first bought all my universal audio plugins and got into that ecosystem, I was like, wow, I just spent, like $1,000, if not a little, if not more. I've probably, just to be totally transparent, I probably spent like $4,000 in total, like on UAD products, and which just like disgusts me. But it's what I've done, and I barely use any of them anymore. I'm not gonna lie. Like, they're cool, I like them, but I have other things that I prefer. And when I first bought them, I was like making high pass cuts with these vintage plugins that couldn't even be exact, So I'd be like, oh, well, I know that I need to cut at 130, but, I want to use this Neve that only cuts at 82 or 150 because, like, it's a nice plugin, right? So I bought it. I should use it. It's going to make it better. No, not at all, right? So, like, what I'm really saying here is if you're buying something, understand why you're buying it. I have certain plugins that I use, like, once a month. And when I use them once a month, I'm so thankful that I own that plugin. Because it was the only thing that would have done the job in that moment. There are very few plugins that are like that, but there's certain ones, right? So overall, I would say, better plugins or more expensive plugins are not going to be the things that make your music sound good, right? It's going to be understanding the principles, understanding the production techniques. And now look, I'll be honest with you. The reason I use, plugins that I've bought, third-party plugins, is because I do hear a difference. Right? Subtle, but meaningful. I hear a difference in like the reverb. So, like my favorite reverb is the Capitol Chambers reverb, right? From Universal Audio. I also love their Lexicon 224. I love their EMT 140. I know I was just bashing Universal Audio, but I actually love their reverb algorithms. They're some of my absolute favorites. Those sound really beautiful. I love the compression artifact of the Valley People Dynamite, of the Distressor, plugin from Slate. I love the way that the tube breakup occurs in Positive Grid plugins. I like the way that the preamps overdrive and Slate digital emulations. I have my specific things that I've worked with them. I know what they do, right? And I figure out when to use which tool when. So like what I recommend if you want to get into that plugin thing is buy one pack. Don't buy shit tons of things at once, right? Yeah, Valhalla Reverb is a great reverb. So buy like the SSL native bundle or the Fab Filter bundle, or the Slate digital bundle. And like first experiment with that stuff and see what's there and try to learn it as good as possible. Because the thing is that at the end of the day, it's just a matter of preference about which of these third-party plugins are better, right? There's such subtle differences between why you prefer one to the other, and that's something that you should develop over the period of 5 years, 10 years, That's something as you're refining your tools in your arsenal, you're like, oh, okay, that's like a professional tennis player saying, I like these type of strings instead of these type of strings, right? If you just started playing tennis, you're like, well, I'm going to get these strings because Roger Federer uses them. You're not going to know the fucking difference, So anyway, plugins don't make your music better. Okay, so next one. Your mix quality is why you're not getting signed or why you're not successful. This is nonsense, right? At the end of the day, mixes are important. As you probably know, I love mixing. I could talk about mixing all day. I put in hours and hours and hours on making sure that my mixes sound beautiful on my music, and I spent a lot of time thinking about that. But the thing is that the reason I think about that so much is because I've spent years and years and years and years producing and creating music. And I already am so in tune with my creative process and making music that, at least for me, I think is creative and cool and good. And so your focus should be on making the dopest music you can, the most creative music and inventive music that you can. If I were to receive a demo, right? Like I have a label that I just started with my friend out in LA. Very, very small, nothing like super serious. But, we just want to put out music that we're passionate about. If I receive a demo that's really well mixed, but I don't like the music, I don't fucking care that it's well mixed. I'd be like, oh, this is well mixed. Don't like it. If I receive a demo that does not sound good, but musically has just acres of soul for years, soul for days, whatever, I don't know. That's not my slang there. But bottom line is, if I connect with it musically, I'm going to be like, this is amazing. Let's get it mixed. Right? So if you're sending demos to labels, especially in the dance music world, and they're like, I don't know, not for us, right? It's not because of your mix. It's because they just don't like the music or it doesn't connect with them, right? So the reason I say this is I don't want you to go spend $500 on a mix engineer. I don't want you to go spend $1,000 on a mix engineer or more than that, No. Just make your music as good as you can. Make it sound as good as you can. And then start trying to put it out there. And look, I understand that a lot of people are trying to self-release music. So you want your mix to sound as good as possible, right? But I have to ask you this question, okay? Unless you know that you're going to get at least 50,000, 100,000, 500,000 streams, why are you spending money on getting your music done? Other than mastering, I highly recommend paying for mastering. But that's cheap. Even expensive mastering is like $120, $150, right? Which compared to getting a mix done, that costs a lot of money. I can't tell how many students that I've had have been like, yo, I got this mix done from this guy who's won like 3 Grammys. I hate it. I'm like, that doesn't surprise me at all. Like, he's not you. You know what you want, So make it sound as good as you can. And also, like, if you just started making music, I hate to break it to you, you're probably not going to be famous just yet, right? Very rare. Sometimes there are examples of people who, like, after 6 months start getting successful. And good for them. Everyone has a different process. Everyone has a different amount of time. Getting your mixes sounding really good isn't what's going to make your music successful. All right. Next one. More limiting equals more loudness. Right. Okay. So this is a quick one. People think that the more you pump a limiter, that the way to get your music really loud is just crank it into a limiter. To an extent, that's true. But like to go back to the mastering session that I had with my friend with my guy Kevin on Monday. He barely uses limiters. He barely will do more than 2 decibels of limiting, maybe 3 decibels of limiting max, right? What a limiter is it's a compressor. Literally, it's a compressor. A compressor that has a higher ratio, has a 10-to-1 ratio or higher, is technically a limiter. So the contemporary limiters of today, the brick wall limiters, what those are is they're just compressors with a ratio of 1,000 to 1. Now, if you were tuned in last week for compression, right, you may remember that what the first thing that a compressor is going to do is target low frequencies. So it's going to thin your music out, right? Now, the right amount of limiting will tighten the low frequencies and control them. So that's cool. But what's also going to do is it's going to boost your highs. It's going to make your highs a little bit, I don't want to say harsher, but a little bit sharper, right? It's also going to introduce distortion because what you're doing is you're slamming it into a ceiling and you're just pushing it harder and harder. The more that you push into that ceiling, the more you're creating distortion. We don't like distortion. Not digital limiting distortion, at least. We like distortion on other things, but not in the final master, right? When you don't want to create and you don't want to initiate distortion as part of quality control. So yeah, I mean, do not just throw limiters on and slam it and think that that it's going to be great. Now, I should mention that, yeah, if you're making like mainstream EDM, maybe that's what's expected, so maybe you do have to do that. But in most other cases, I would recommend avoid aggressive limiting if you can. It can be cool to limit like individual sounds. Sometimes putting a limiter on a kick, putting a limiter on guitars, actually, like for metal, if you put a limiter on like a guitar bus, that can do really cool things. Brings them right to the front of the mix, makes them not dynamic, makes them greasy and in your face. Okay, so the next one we got is mono out your bass on the master. Whew, I don't even know where to start with this. So there's a really simple way to think about this, right? Monoing out your low end can be a great idea. It can be. The issue where people the problem is that people will start monoing out at frequencies that are like way too high. When we're talking about monoing out low end, you really shouldn't go above like 60. You can. There are instances where you could. Now, with me saying that, there's this engineer named Luca Pretolesi, very, very famous, Grammy Award winning, probably like the most notorious EDM engineer. He monos out everything under 300. Now, the reason that he does that is because his clients are the biggest main stage EDM producers and DJs in the world. And so they're more concerned with the track being powerful and perceivable on the biggest sound systems in the world. So in that case, monoing out a lot of information can be really useful because when something is mono, it's more powerful. And also, the thing is about monoing out low end is that every single live system, every PA system in the world has something called a crossover. And so unless you're using a subwoofer at home for production, which I honestly recommend to not do, then you're not really encountering this crossover problem. You'd encounter it in a two-way or a three. If you have three-way speakers, there'll be a crossover frequency, right, between the different cones. If you have two-way speakers, there are crossover frequencies. And all that crossover frequencies mean is that basically, okay, the subwoofer will start producing bass from 150 hertz and below. Bass above that will be represented by the PA system, right? So what ends up happening is inherently you get a little bit of phase. You're going to lose a little bit of wherever that crossover happens, you're going to lose a little bit of information there. It's just going to happen. Even the best sound systems in the world, it happens. But the reason that like Luca Pretolesi will mono everything out above 300 or something is because you don't know where that crossover is going to be. There are systems that have it at like 50, which is really bad, but those systems exist, right? And like if you're an up and coming DJ, you don't know where you're going to be DJing and playing, right? You might be playing at like really bad places. So if you want to test your music out, then okay, it can sometimes be a good idea to mono things out even above like everything below 100, right? That can work. Here's the catch, okay? If you have information at 100 hertz or at 150 hertz or 160 hertz out wide, stereo, right? That's important. So let's say you have a pad that's doing a lot of work for the feeling of fullness in the track, and it has stuff at like 100 hertz and it needs to be there. Well, if you start monoing out above that, you're going to start getting some weird phase artifacts. Things are going to start sounding really, really bizarre. So if you have low frequency information out wide and you produced it that way, but then you go, oh, I'm supposed to mono things out, what are you doing? Right? That's so paradoxical. You're literally undoing what you just did. So I don't recommend monoing things out above 60, really. Right? First of all, there shouldn't be anything below 60 out wide. This is going to pull down the mix. I mean, like, I don't want to say shouldn't. There can be. There's more and more examples of like distorted 808s being out wide. And that's like a really cool vibe. But again, you have to understand what your audience is, right? If you're producing for headphones, you can have more low information out wide if you know how to control it properly, because that's going to make it feel more immersive. If you're producing for, 30,000 person festivals for Tiesto to fucking play your stuff or whatever, then yeah, you're probably going to want to mono out more stuff. But then you also should just be producing where things are already monoed out. So like, that's the thing. You have to realize that if something's down the middle, it's monoed. In theory, right? It's pretty much mono. So the other thing to do is, if you want to see what your track sounds like and you have information out wide in mono, right? Just hit the mono button on your gain utility. All right, so drag on the utility. Hit mono. If your track still sounds as full as punchy, then great. You don't need to mono out that information. That means that when it is monoed out, inevitably on some PA system, it's going to sound fine. So that's a good way to test that. It's a good way to test if you need to mono out information. If you lose information, detail, power, punch, presence, all these things when you mono it out, then maybe you might want to look at repositioning a couple things in the mix. Anyway, so that's that. All right, so this is an important one. There's this, this idea that the one-size-fits-all mastering. Okay, so let me rephrase this, right? If you watch a YouTube video or a tutorial channel or something like that, or even are on like Reddit or Gear Sluts or some shit, and like you see someone gives you a mastering chain or even offers you a template, right? It's like, hey, this is my channel, and if you subscribe, I'll give you a free vocal chain template that's going to make all your vocals always sound dope. This is bullshit. This is total bullshit, and if someone says this, you should not listen to them. Very simple reason why, okay? Not all music sounds the same. In fact, no music sounds the same pretty much, right? These specific issues and problems, right? And also good things about a particular vocal or master or mix or anything or drum bus, right? The particular things that make that stuff good are unique to it, right? So you should treat every single sound, every single production session like it's its own person, with its own unique needs, right? If we all had the same psychologist telling us the exact same thing, it wouldn't work for most of us, right? Maybe every once in a while a person would find value in that, right? So yeah, avoid these like templates that are specifically designed for mixing or mastering or stuff like that. Forget about that. That stuff is not useful. It's not going to make your music better. What you need to do is learn why you should do certain things at certain times so that you understand when to apply it, right? I honestly believe that learning about music production, learning about any sort of technical-based art is like a 360-degree curve, right? Basically, the first 180 degrees are just learning the information. It's just learning like, okay, what does an EQ do? What is compression? What is a filter? Like all that stuff, What is the first 180 degrees? Why and when is the second 180 degrees? And that's actually more important in my opinion. So when do you use compression? Why do you use compression? When do you use a certain type of EQ? Why do you use a certain type of EQ? When do you use reverb? Why do you use reverb? Right? That's the second half of coming back around. And then you get the full 360, you arrive back at the beginning and you realize, wow, this is a lot more simple than I thought it was. In fact, all the best producers out there are doing really simple shit. I hate to break it to you. They don't have 6-level audio effect racks. They don't have 25 instrument racks, right? They're making really good decisions because they understand what they're doing. That's what it's all about. So don't try to look for shortcuts to make your music better. Don't try to look for shortcuts to make your sound better. They don't really exist, right? What you want to look for is information that's going to give you the tools to. Because what happens when suddenly the day comes where that chain that you always use, for some reason, it just stops working? Like, who knows why, right? You want to be able to synthesize these things yourself. You shouldn't have to rely on other things. All right. So next one, this is a funny one, is that certain DAWs sound better or worse than others. That's just bullshit. There's not much more to say about that. Yeah. So anyone that's like, oh, you use Logic, you should use Ableton. Oh, you use Ableton, you should use Logic. They're just an idiot. So, and sorry if some of you guys believe that. I'm not calling you idiots. All I'm trying to say is that you're wrong. I use Logic and Ableton. I like them both. I can make great music in either of them. I don't care. Right? If you tied me down and held a gun to my head, I'll take Logic, but that's only because I've been producing on it since I was like 15. So I just feel that little bit extra more comfortable with it. But I could totally make it all happen in Ableton if I needed to, right? Same thing with like FL. There are people out there who are like Fruity Loops is so much better than everything. And I'm really happy for them that they feel that way. And I'm happy that they use Fruity Loops. So yeah, let's see. Next. Kind of already talked about this, but there is no one plugin that will make your music sound better. This is just really to try to help you avoid the marketing schemes, right? Is that a lot of the times they'll sell it and be like, want to know why your music doesn't sound as warm and powerful as all your favorite hits? Want to know why your music doesn't sound like Deadmau5 and Tiesto and Cascade or, whatever it is, right? It's not that plugin, that's for sure. So that's that. All right. This is a good one. These are the last two because I'm going to have to wrap it up. Mastering will not fix your mix. Okay? So I don't want you guys to expect a mastering engineer to make your mix, which is not a professional grade mix, sound like a professional grade track. So, I didn't understand this at first when I started getting my music mastered. I'd be disappointed when I got it back. I'd be like, what the fuck? Why doesn't this sound like Macioplex, right? Like, why doesn't this sound like my favorite music? Isn't that what mastering's supposed to do? No, not really. Mastering basically just takes your mix and just dials it in a little bit more. It just takes what's there and makes it the most defined version of what exists, right? So, best example would be if we're saying that mastering is like working out, and mixing is like your naturally given body, right? You're probably not going to be a pro football player if you have a certain build, if you're not above a certain height and weight class, right? Just the extra bit of work that you would do to improve it is not going to make a drastic difference into what it actually is there, right? That's probably actually a terrible analogy, so maybe we should forget about that. I think you should ignore what I just said. That was a terrible analogy. What really bottom line, right, is that try to get your mix as close as possible to the mastered sound. That's going to get you the better master. The better your mix is, the better the master is. I would say that this is now, I'll stand by this analogy, okay? If your mix is a B, mastering will make it a B+. In certain cases, if it's the mastering engineer is a freak, maybe an A-, right? It'll only ever move it up a little bit, right? If your mix is a C, maybe it'll bring your master to a B, right? Because you can fix horrible shit, but it's only really when you hand in a good mix, a nice mix that really doesn't have that many problems, right? Look, most mixes have some little problems. Oh, okay, little boxy here. Oh, okay, a little bit harsh there. Oh, okay, a little bit boomy there. I like that simple, Sam. Yeah, that's nicer, right? Mastering is the shiny spray on the muscles. Mixing is the working out. So yeah, I mean, just bottom line, don't rely on mastering to make your mix better. Yes. Oh, good fellow, wow. That's the comment of the day. That's dope. Produce like there's no mixing, mix like there's no mastering. That's great. And the last part is just funny. So yeah, no, I agree with that. That's how I produce. I produce as if it's my mix, right? So I'm already staging my mix as I'm creating. So if I select a kick drum that's really boomy at 100, I'm not going to make a bass that's at 100, right? Because that's going to create a nightmare. That's really great, though. I really like that. Yeah, and Gunther, 100%. If your track is a really great musical idea, that's the most important thing, right? At the end of the day, if the music makes me feel something, makes me feel good, or makes me, whatever feeling that I need to feel, and I connect with it in a way that makes me want to revisit it, then you've done your job, and it doesn't matter how good your mix is. In fact, there's this great artist called Jai Paul, who was fucking sick. One of the sickest producers around. And like a lot of his breakout tracks are just like not good mixes. But I should say they're not good mixes technically, but they're phenomenal mixes in terms of they communicate the feeling of the music in a way that it wouldn't be the same if it was mixed properly, right? So sometimes music sounds better when it's bad. I don't know how to put that any other way. There's certain styles, certain ideas that are actually really genuinely are going to lose as part of their beauty and their appeal if you make them sound too good. So that brings me to my last and final myth-busting thing. There are no shortcuts to becoming a good producer. There just aren't. You need to put in time and effort. I'm going to very, very quickly explain to you how I became a good producer. Or at least, hopefully, I'm a good producer. I think I am. I started producing when I was 16 or 17 years old. I'm now 28. When I got into producing, I got the bug, right? And I made music probably, I'm not exaggerating, somewhere between 4 and 7 hours every day for 3 to 4 years. And the thing is that I messed up is I did not seek instruction for a very long time. I was very prideful and very stubborn, and I wanted to do it all myself. I didn't feel like having someone else help me. That was the stupidest mistake I've ever made. I probably could have been a lot further along in my career by now if I had done that. But at the same time, I'm really happy with the way my path is taking me, so I have no regrets. But the only shortcut to becoming good at something is hard work. That's it. The shortcut is the amount of time that you put in, right? If you put in 4 hours a day, you're going to get further than if you put in 2 hours a day. But also, if you put in 30 minutes a day, you're going to get further than if you put in no minutes a day, right? It's a muscle. You got to train it. It's a language. You got to learn it. The less that you speak it, the harder it is to master it, right? If you're speaking the language every day, it's going to come quick. I mean, I got to be honest with you. There are students that I've had that like get really good after 3 months where it's like, okay, you're ready to actually start talking about mixing. Like you're putting in time and effort. Like you're ready to actually start thinking about how do I make it sound more professional, you know? But the bottom line is that in most cases, it's probably going to take you a year or two, probably 2 years to get to a point where you actually could start genuinely, realistically considering whether or not you can make a career out of this. Like I said, there are exceptions. But that more has to do with natural given talent in those cases. So like the reason I'm telling you this is because I don't want you to go hunting on YouTube for the secret to this, the secret to that, right? Any video that advertises itself as this is the way to blank is just a gimmick. There's no one way to do anything. If you gave 10 awesome mix engineers the same stems, they would all approach it completely differently and all give you awesome mixes. If you gave 10 producers the same stems to remix, right? They'd all approach it differently. In fact, if you told 2 really good sound designers, how do you create this sound, create the copy, they'd probably go about it differently, right? So the key is to broaden your arsenal, right? Broaden your toolbox. You want to learn as many skills as possible. This is why it's a really good idea when you're starting out to not only make one type of music. I learn so much when I make other types of music. I've learned more, I would say, from working on musical styles that I don't enjoy as much than I have from working on the musical styles that I do enjoy. Because what ends up happening is you start realizing like, oh, I could take that and apply that to here. Yeah, so just real quick, yeah, and like, look, to Billboard Shah's point, right? When you are putting in the hard work and you find good information, that's awesome, right? There's a really, if you want to find like great mix information, there's this guy named House of Kush, which is just Kush Audio's channel. I watch that to this day still, and I find that sometimes I'm really hearing things and they're like, wow, that's really dope. I hadn't thought about it like that. You know, so, but really at the end of the day, working hard, trial and error, right? Just making a bad bass kick 1,000 times is the thing that's going to make you eventually be good at making a good bass kick, right? So try to, good information to the extent which is possible and just hard work. Now, to Rashane's question, when I say talent, do you mean how slow or fast someone will get better? Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think we need to kid ourselves, okay? All of you who are on this stream today don't have an equal level of talent when it comes to music production. It's just true. There's a reason in sports that some people are better than others. At the end of the day, most of those guys worked just as hard as one another to get that same point. And then what happens is when you work just as hard as the other person, then the talent comes into play a little bit. Then it's a matter of what's your God-given gift? And at the end of the day, we have to just acknowledge some people are more talented than others. Some people are more creative. Some people are more visionary. But the thing is that if there's one thing I can promise you, is that if you work hard enough and hone your skills in music production, you can make a career at it. I can't guarantee you're going to make a career as an artist. I can't guarantee that. That's just, that's more up to other people than it is up to you. But I can confidently say that you can make a living producing other people's music. You can make a living mixing other people's music. You can make a living producing music for video games, soundtracks for films, whatever it is. It's a lot of ways to make money in music. If you can make money teaching, right? There are all sorts of ways that you can commodify these skills, right? And at the end of the day, if you put in a lot of work, there will be opportunities for you. I'm really glad to hear, Manase, that you are digging this. And this is the first 343 Labs video that you're a part of. So that's all I got for you guys today. I'm gonna stick around for 5 or so more minutes because I want to allow you guys to ask questions into the chat, and I'm happy to answer those because I don't have anything more that I wanted to talk about. I covered everything, and my chat is maybe 30-40 seconds delayed, so I'm gonna let you guys just lob some questions in, and if you don't have any, then we'll call it a day. Okay, yeah. So Korean Jesus, I'm actually gonna be away for 2 weeks. So my next stream will be. What will my next stream be? Let's see. I guess the 24th. Yeah, I think my next stream will be the 24th, and we're still figuring out what those topics are gonna be. Wow. Corey Mex Music, thank you, man. That really means a lot. I'm really glad that you dug it. I'm actually I love doing this. I love trying to share information, and hopefully some wisdom that I've accrued over the years being in this industry for about 13 years. So not to be all gimmicky, but please hit the subscribe button because there's a lot of other great content we have on our channel. We'd love to have you back. All right. So let's see. What do you think about separating the producing mixing process or performing at the same time? Okay, this is a good question. So this is Goodfellow. Yeah, this is good. So what's the difference between mixing and producing, and should you separate them? Yeah, so the way that I produce is I basically mix as I go. And so the way that what I consider mixing to be is 2 parts. Mixing is fixing problems and also making something better, right? You can use EQ and reverb and compression and saturation to take a sound that's good and make it even better, right? That is possible. So what I'm doing is I usually, as I'm producing, I am EQing and doing a little bit of compression where I hear that it's necessary. But I'm trying to avoid overmixing, right? So the key is that if you start getting too bogged down in like, oh, how do I fix this issue? Then just move past it, worry about it later, right? The thing is though, is that I also view, since I'm honestly like, I'll just, throw aside modesty for a second, since I know a lot about mix engineering, right? I really do know a lot about it and feel pretty confident in my skills. I think about music composition also along the lines of mixing. So like the second I have more than one sound in a song, in my opinion, I'm already mixing. So as I'm putting the track together, I'm thinking about the mix. I'm staging the mix, visualizing it. I'm panning things immediately. So the quickest things you could do to make your mixes, your productions sound more like your final mix is do panning stuff. Do volume automation, as parts are developing. Those types of things are cool. Do a little bit of high passing if it needs to be done. I track a lot of live guitar in my music, and so like sometimes I'll get the room rumble. So I'll usually cut things out, below 80, 50, 100, whatever it may be, just like as I'm producing, and like I don't worry too much about like, does that guitar sound perfect? Just like address the problems as they arise. So hopefully that's helpful. But yeah, I wouldn't get too bogged down in mixing as you're just going. So when you make different genres, how do you understand the basics of that genre? I would say, man, you just gotta listen to the music. You just gotta hear what the tendencies are. So you just gotta use your ears on that. Regarding paying for a mix, mostly focused on technology. I don't know if you can really make a car explode if you shoot it in the gas tank, but I hope that it's true. I feel like no would be the answer. Okay, so I don't fully understand your question, Brand New Talk, regarding paying for a mix. You say, I've noticed engineers mostly focus on technical versus creative. Yeah, I mean, that's the complex thing about like... All right, so here's what I want to say with... Here's what I want to say about paying for a mix and what the role of a mix engineer is, okay? The thing about like mixing is that the reason it exists and existed initially is because all music was recorded with microphones and to tape. And so that was more of a like process where the person who recorded it wasn't necessarily the person that was going to mix it. And so the band sure as shit wasn't going to mix it themselves, right? Because back when you're working with microphones and tape, like the level of engineering was just like what you had to know was such a higher threshold to be able to even do it in like a passable way. It was just more complicated. There was just more technical shit you had to understand. Like it wasn't just like, oh, let me drag an EQ on, right? You had to literally patch things around and you have to understand voltage, compatibilities and all sorts of stuff. So that's why you would pass your track off to someone to mix it, right? And the mixing person wouldn't necessarily be like doing tons of creative stuff, but sometimes they would, right? A lot of times the band would be there for the mixing session. And so the mixer, the band would say, hey, we want that snare to be bigger. Can we make it have more, like, how do we make it sound big like this record? And the mixer goes, oh, you put on this type of reverb. And they do that. Oh, that sounds dope, right? The mixing engineer's job was really to just take problems from the recording, which there almost were guaranteed to be. It was very rare you'd have a tracking engineer who would just perfectly track things, right? And fix it and make the recording function together as one live project, right? These days, when it comes to electronic music production, right, you're sourcing the sounds yourself. You're the tracking engineer. You're the producer. So, like, you understand what you want the mix to be. Whereas back then, there was actually possibilities for what the mix could be, right? The mixer could be like, hey, check out what happens if I take this guitar solo and layer it in with a reverse version of the solo, right? That could add something that the band never would have thought to do. So, like, really, mix engineers increasingly are not bringing so much creative vision to the table. There are certain ones that will, but you should really be bringing all of the creativity from your end. mostly. They're really just going to be tightening your sound. That's what the mix engineer is going to do. So like I also recommend, if you're going to pay for mixing, be at the session. Because then you can say, hey, can you do this creative thing that I don't know how to do as well myself? And they'll go, oh yeah, sure. Also the thing to be aware of is like, just because they're a good mix engineer does not mean they're a good producer. In fact, a lot of mix engineers are not good producers. The best mix engineers usually, though, are quite good at producing as well, because then what they're able to do is they're able to understand musically what needs to happen. So, yeah. Korean Jesus, maybe we could look into some effect track stuff. But I think I'd rather leave that to maybe another instructor to do on like an Ableton-based thing. I think what we'll probably do is we might do a compression 2.0 type thing, but there's a lot that we can do. So, yeah. Anyway, that's all we got for today. I really appreciate you guys being so active in the stream. Again, I'm Lewis Beck. I'm glad that it seemed like it was, helpful for you guys. And I'm going to be gone for the next 2 weeks, but I will be back. And if you dug the content, please subscribe. And if you think you're ready to, go beyond just the streams and want to take some courses at 343, please visit 343labs.com. I really I know that in some senses this is my job to sell it, but I really genuinely believe that getting a core foundation in Ableton or Logic or synthesis or anything like that really helps to understand the fundamentals that you can learn from, so if you feel like you're still a little shaky on that stuff and you want to put yourself in a position to really grow quickly as an artist and producer, I would recommend taking a class. I think we'll do a compression 2.0 stream though, for sure. Anyway, please hit the subscribe button if you have not already. We got tons of great content all the time. Tons of super talented and experienced instructors giving all sorts of different perspectives on all the different, types, all the different facets of production. So yeah, have a pleasant few weeks until I see you guys again, and catch you soon enough. Peace.